everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. I just want to give a bit of, some ground rules for what we're about to experience with one another and give some context for why you're here. So in 1939, the New York City news tycoon William Randolph Hearst had an idea of creating a holiday that would celebrate citizenship. Okay? So the next year, Congress decided to designate the third Sunday in May as I Am an American Day. And this went on for a few years, but then in 1952, an Ohio resident, Olga T. Weber, decided that she wanted to shift that date and make it actually today. Make it on the September 17th, which would be the day that the Constitution was ratified. So Dwight D. Eisenhower was in office at the time. He decided that he would sign that into law, and today we have Citizenship Day. In 2004, Constitution Day became an official holiday alongside of Citizenship Day. And so what you're about to experience is a public oration of the United States Constitution in full by our community leaders that you see to the right of yourself and to the left of the stage here. So I encourage you to use this time as a time of reflection and even meditation on the last 232 years of American history, considering the progress, the challenges and obstacles, current issues, and also future promise. Just some instruction to our leaders. When each of you come up, if you would, you'll read your portion of the Constitution. If you would announce the article and the section that you're reading, and then whoever is on deck, if you are ready to go, when the person ahead of you has stepped down, you'll step on up, and then you'll share with us as well. We're asking all of you who are participating with us, no outward response, but to instead eloquently listen, as Langston Hughes once wrote, be engaged inwardly with what you're about to hear. At the completion of our reading, I'm going to deliver a few prepared remarks and then announce an upcoming opportunity at the center. I'm going to turn the stage over now, though, to Lisa Deaton to start us off.
This isn't a radio show. A long bit of silence there. First of all, thank you, Elizabeth Wells, for inviting me to do this. We hear songs and they become routine to us, very much like pledges and certain prayers, and we say them over and over, and we don't always pay a lot of attention to the words. And I'm hoping that today this song will sort of be lifted up out of its routine for you, and you'll see it for what it is. It's a love song to this country. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Freedom wings.
sharing your gift with us. Beautiful. To start us off, I had asked for Kelly Williams and her middle school drama class to put together a rendition of the preamble. And so we're excited to have her here with us today also, but we're going to play this for you, and then that will kick us off into our first reader, which will be Pastor Turner, reading the first article, first section of the Constitution. Here we go. Just work, wait.
Ms. Williams, please share with your class. Thank you for your class taking time to prepare that. I know I'm totally off script here, but that's okay for just a moment. If when that's available, Patrick, would you forward that out to everyone? I think it would be great for give us an opportunity to watch that. All right, they're going to play it to the end. They're going to play it to the end is what they just said. So. Number one, I want to say thank you for the opportunity given each of us as not only your elected servants, officials, the opportunity to serve, but also to have an opportunity to participate in our hope is getting back to the basics of what our country was founded upon. Regardless of where you are in life, what side of the aisle you may be on, I think it's time for us to get back to the basics of where our country was created and formed from. At this moment, I'll be reading Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Thank you.
Article 1, Section 2. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. Representatives in direct taxes shall be proportioned among the several states, which may include within the Union according to their representative numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of the free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and with every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as shall be by law directed. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. When vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. The House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers, and shall have the sole power of impeachment.
Article 1, Section 3. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature, thereof of 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Immediately after they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election, they shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the 2nd year, and the second class at the expiration of the 4th year, and the third class at the expiration of the 6th year, so that 1/3 may be chosen every 2nd year. And if vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained the age of 30 years and been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, and shall have no vote unless they be equally divided. The Senate shall choose their other officers, and also a President pro tem in the absence of the Vice President, or when he shall exercise the office of President of the United States. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to remove from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law.
Article 1, Section 4. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. The Congress shall assemble at least once every year. and such meetings shall be on the first Monday in December, unless they shall appoint by law, appoint a different day.
Article 1, Section 5. Each house shall be the judge of the election, returns, and qualifications of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business, but a smaller number may adjourn from day to day, and may be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each house may provide. Each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3 expel a member. Each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings, and from time to time punish the same, except in such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy, and the yeas and nays of the members of either house on any question shall, at the desire of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal. Neither house during the session of Congress shall, without consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two houses shall be sitting.
Article 1, Section 6. The senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. They shall, in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have been created, or the emoluments whereof shall have been increased during such time. And no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office.
Article 1, Section 7. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If after such reconsideration 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent, together with the objections, to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered, and if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become a law. But in all such cases, the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered into the journal of each house respectively. If any bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, Sundays excepted, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law, in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law. Every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary shall be presented to the President of the United States, and before the same shall take effect, shall be approved by him, or being disapproved by him, shall be repassed by 2/3 of the Senate and House of Representatives according to the rules and limitations prescribed in the case of the bill.
1, Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, impose and exercise to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties imposed and excise shall be uniform throughout the United States, to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and within Indian tribes, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standards of weights and measures, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and the current coin of the United States, to establish post office and post roads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing the limit times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries, to constitute a tribunal inferior to the Supreme Court, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the laws of nations, to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulations of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militant, to exercise the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections and repel invasions, to provide for organization, arming and discipline the militant, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training in the militant according to the disciplines prescribed by Congress, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such duties not exceeding 10 miles square as may by sessions for particular states, in the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature and of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, docks, yards, and other needed buildings, and to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for the carrying into execution for foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department of the office thereof.
Article 1, Section 9. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, public safety may require it. No bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. No capitation or direct or other direct tax shall be laid, unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. No preference shall be given by any regulation of commerce or revenue to the ports of one state over those of another, nor shall vessels bound to or from one state be obliged to enter, clear, or pay duties in another. No money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state.
Article 1, Section 10. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title or nobility. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any impost or duties on imports or exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all such laws shall be subject to revision and the control of the Congress. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay.
Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed in an elector. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, of whom one at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. And they shall make a list of all the persons voted for, and of the number of votes for each, which lists they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all certificates, and votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the President, and if such number by a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if there be more than one who have such majority and have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. And if no person have a majority, then from the 5 highest of the list, the said House shall in like manner choose the president. But in choosing the president, the vote shall be taken by the states, the representation from each state voting 1 vote. The quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. In every case, after the choice of the president, the person having the greatest number of the votes of the electors shall be the vice president. But if there should remain 2 or more who have equal votes, the Senate shall choose from them by ballot the vice president. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes. Each day shall be the same throughout the United States. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and been 14 years of residence within the United States. In the case of the removal of the President from the office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall be devolved of the Vice President, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the President and Vice President, declaring what officer shall then act as President, and such officer shall accordingly, under the disability, be removed, or President shall be elected. The President shall at stated times receive for his services a compensation, which shall be neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period of any other emolument from the United States or any of them. Before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and be to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Article 2, Section 2. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, and of the militia of the several states, and called into actual service in the United States, he may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. He shall have power, by and with advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the present law, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The President shall have power to fill up the vacancies that may happen during the recess by the Senate, and by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of the next session.
Article 2, Section 3. He shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all officers of the United States.
Article 2, Section 4. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
Article 3, Section 1. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one supreme and court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office.
Article 3, Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases of law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States and treaties made, or which shall be made, under their authority. To all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same states, claiming lands under grants or different states,
and between a state or the citizens thereof, and foreign states, citizens or subjects. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, and to those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where said crimes shall have been committed. But when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed.
Article 3, Section 3. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. The Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted.
Article 4, Section 1. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. And the Congress may, by general laws, prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved and the effect thereof.
Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and on application of the legislature or executive when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence.
Article 4, Section 3. New states may be admitted by the Congress into this Union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of 2 or more states, or parts of states, without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as the Congress. The Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state.
Article 4, Section 2, the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. The person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime, who shall flee from justice and be found in another state, shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. No person held to service or labor in any one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequences of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on the claim of the party to whom each service or labor may be due.
Article 5. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in the 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate.
Article 6. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious text shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States.
Article 7, the ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. Attest William Jackson, Secretary, done in convention by the unanimous consent of the state present in the 17th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1787, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 12th, in the witness whereof we hereto subscribe our names. George Washington, President and Deputy from Virginia, delegates from Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania.
Now, this is the part of the program where I get to deliver some comments, but I want to make sure that we get to see Ms. Williams' video. If we can get that pulled up first. So if you would, this is a little dangerous, but if you need to to take kind of a stretch for just a second. Nobody run out of the building or anything, but if you need to just kind of take a breather while we're pulling this up, I think it's well worth it. So I want to start off with a little bit of a story. And some of you have heard me say this before. I just enjoy telling this story, so just humor me. But centuries ago, there was a monastery. And in this monastery, there was a cat. And every morning during morning prayers, this cat would come walking out into the monastery, and it would disturb everyone who was trying to participate in the morning prayers, the monks that were in there. Well, the chief priest, or the head monk, decided that the best thing to do would be to catch the cat, and during morning prayers, he would take the cat outside and humanely tie the cat to a tree just outside the monastery. Then, as soon as morning prayers were over, the head monk would untie the cat, and then everybody would go about their business. So this goes on for years. And one day, the cat dies. Actually, let me say first, the monk actually died. The monk died, and they had their time of mourning. But years later, or after the monk had died, the other monks continued this practice of tying this cat to the tree just outside during morning prayers. Then one day the cat died. And what the monks decided to do is go out and buy another cat so that they could continue tying the cat to the tree during morning prayers. So this goes on for years, and then one day a storm comes in. And the storm blows down the tree that the monks had been tying the cat to. So what the monks decided to do is, on the property, somewhere else, they found a tree that looked like it would be sufficient, sturdy enough to tie a cat to the tree. So they dug up that tree, and they decided to plant it outside of the monastery where they could continue tying the cat to the tree during morning prayers. And so years later, one of the studious monks decides that it was important for him to write these beautiful statements about why it's so necessary to tie cats to a tree during morning prayers. So I want to start off with that story because oftentimes we create our meaning from our own myths, right? And this is kind of scary at times. We've just taken a half hour and heard things that we may have never heard before, read about the way that our government was intended to function. But oftentimes the truth gets lost in pop culture, in half-remembered lessons from elementary school. And so we ask ourselves often, why are we doing this? Or why do we value this thing that we've decided to block out a time of our day to focus in on? So we find a disconnect between those things that we revere and an ability to even articulate why it is that we revere that particular thing. So sometimes we even create an identity for ourselves that doesn't even reflect how we actually operate from day to day. And I can prove this to you. So if you'll just finish this lyric for me. Okay? If I say, I want to rock and roll all night, you would say, and party every day. Okay? Let's keep going. That was kind of an easy one. Who was the king of pop? Michael Jackson? Okay. All right, let's try another one, a little more current. What superhero does Chris Hemsworth portray? Thor. I heard Thor. Okay, very good. All right. So I got another one for you. Complete the sentence, complete the phrase. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Finish that one for me? Oh, you actually were pretty close. It's actually really good. You weren't supposed to be able to know that. That's not how that was supposed to go. The rest of that is actually against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So maybe that was a little bit unfair, but I'm trying to prove a point here that we've got these echoes of these phrases or these things that we We say that we value, but when it really comes down to it, have we placed an appropriate amount of value in whatever that thing is? So we're going to continue digging into this. An Annenberg poll in 2017 found that only 26% of Americans can name all three branches of government. Only 26%, okay? Now, that's down from 2011 when 38% could name all three branches. But here's the scary part. 33% could not name any of the three branches of government. 37% could not name any of the 5 freedoms that are granted in the First Amendment. 37%. And we get 5 freedoms in that First Amendment, but none of those could be identified by 37%. So before you start asking cynical questions like, who are these millennials? Time out. I'm a millennial, so I want to take offense at that. But seriously, this particular study was conducted with people ages 18 to 65 from all 50 states. So this is a pretty good sampling. Now, in 2015, 12% of people interviewed in a particular Annenberg poll thought that the Bill of Rights included the right to own a pet. We know that's in there, right? A C-SPAN survey found that 90% of likely voters agreed with this statement. Decisions made by the U.S. Supreme Court have an impact on my everyday life as a citizen. But 57% could not name one single Supreme Court justice. But there was a poll that was done in 2016 where 1 out of 10 college graduates did think that Judge Judy was a sitting justice on the Supreme Court. So I want to give another little story here. So there's a particular gentleman that every once a week he would go to a restaurant and he would order 3 pints. He would sit down and he would enjoy all 3 of the drinks. Well, after weeks of serving this particular gentleman, the man came back in and he only ordered 2 pints. And so the bartender, the server, came up to him and said, "Sir, I've just noticed, I'm not trying to get into your business or anything, but I've just noticed that you've always been coming in here for the last few weeks ordering 3 drinks, and this time you've just ordered 2. What's going on?" And the gentleman said, "Well, I have my father, and then there's myself and my brother, and so they actually live in different countries, and in the past I'd always wanted to just commemorate or drink to their absence, and my father just died last week, and so now I just having a drink to the living." And so the server said, "I'm sorry to hear that. I'm going to let you, get along your way. I'll mind my own business." And so for the next few weeks, the man continued to come in and he ordered 2 drinks. Well, then one day, the man comes in and he orders 1. So you kind of see what's going on here. The server comes up to him and says, "Sir, I'm sorry, did something happen to your brother?" And the guy kind of looks at him for a second, confused, and he realizes why he's asked that. And he says, "Oh, no, I've been to the doctor, and the doctor's told me to stop drinking." Now let that sink in for a second. He's still ordering 1 drink, right? So that's cognitive dissonance. And we say that we value something, but do we actually demonstrate that we value that thing? It would be humorous if it wasn't for the profound consequences that come with an electorate that's often out of touch. This civic literacy crisis that we have in the United States isn't new. It's not even a partisan issue. You may recall from the 1983 Reagan administration, they published The Nation at Risk. And in 1987, Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind detailed a decline in the American public education and civic literacy areas. So both have sometimes been labeled as having a more conservative lens. So if that's a concern of yours, Chris Eliza in 2017 published an op-ed piece that was titled, "Americans Know Literally Nothing About the Constitution," and that sang a very similar tune. In 2018, a Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship multiple choice poll found that most native-born American citizens would fail the U.S. citizenship test. Now here's the thing about this test. You only have to score 60 on this test to pass. And out of a sample of 1,000 people who took the test, only 3% of native-born American citizens passed that test. 3%. Thomas Jefferson wrote that wherever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. What does that imply? That our democratic system rests on the assumption that citizens are civically literate. That's so passive-aggressive at times. So maybe it's not that we don't care. Maybe it's just that we're overstimulated, or maybe we're numb. And this reminds me of something that I saw on television early into the Afghanistan conflict, where I saw there was a reporter who had been embedded in Kandahar, and had come back to New York, and he was in the studio and had showed his piece of all the footage that he had collected. And so one of the hosts asked this particular reporter if there was anything else lesson-wise that he had taken from his time in Afghanistan. This particular reporter said, actually there was. When we were going through all of these hours and hours and hours of footage, I noticed that there was these two reoccurring figures that kept appearing on the footage. And one was a young boy, and one was the mule that belonged to the young boy. And so what he noticed is that this duo was always in the footage, but in particular what he found interesting is that as these massive blasts and cacophonous explosions were going off throughout the mountains of Kandahar, this little boy and his mule would just stand stoically watching and listening to all this take place. And every once in a while, you would see the donkey's or the mule's ear twitch just a little bit. But there was no fear. So why was that taking place? Why was there no fear from the boy or from his pet? Participate a little bit here. Why was there a lack of reaction, do you think? It was normal. They were used to it. They were desensitized to the sounds of what was going on. And I think that too often that has happened to us. We've become desensitized to the phrases or the power of the words that you just heard. So how do we resuscitate our receptors to really have what we just heard hit us in the same way that would have hit the audience who first heard or read the Constitution in 1787? Dr. Elizabeth Wells approached me in June, and Patrick Brennan as well, about hosting a course on the Constitution stemming from an article that she shared with me, and actually brought the newspaper along with me from the White County News Telegraph. And the author asked a few citizenship questions that are pretty standard to start with, just some trivial questions. How many amendments are there? How many branches of government are there? In case you don't know from this talk tonight, it is 3, just so you know. How many Supreme Court justices do we have? There were maybe 10 to 15 questions on there. But then she actually started the article and said, I still use all the basics I learned in public school, which are no longer being taught. The curriculum has changed vastly in our education system. And I'll admit, at first, I took offense to that. I thought, no way, not in my classroom when I was teaching, even from the people that I taught with, that can't be true. And in fact, Georgia's standards for civic literacy have increased over the last 2 to 3 decades. That's true. That's true. But when I remove my emotions from the table, here is the uncomfortable truth. Only 9 states and Washington, D.C. require a whole year of government or civics. 31 states only require a half year of civics or U.S. government for graduation. 10 states have no requirement for civics education. Now, beyond that, many failures in civic education originate from the disagreement on what civic education even should be. There is a very good and wholesome conversation and focus on civic obligations, on community service, things that are very important in our communities. But for over half a century, this whole idea of civics education, it kind of got subsumed with this bigger idea of social studies. And what this is just a big umbrella that covers sometimes everything from history to economics to geography, and then you have civics as well. And when you have an area that is that massive, it's very hard to know exactly what it is that you're going to do with it. So this creates a situation where civic knowledge is taught in a bit of a vacuum and not as an interdisciplinary skill. State civics curricula are heavy on knowledge, but often light on building skills and agency for civic engagement. So some of our political tensions are probably due to poor education or civic knowledge. If less than 1/3 of adult Americans don't even know that 3 branches of government exist, or that there are 3, and what separations of powers actually are, then our ideas of what government should be doing, or what government ought to do, are obviously going to be massively different. And I heard one time about the origin of the word disaster. So many, many centuries ago, when sea captains were on their ships and all that they had was the astrolabe. You ever seen an astrolabe? You have to find something in the sky in order to make sure that you're going in the right direction. Here's this participation piece again. What would they look for in the sky? The North Star, right? You look for the North Star. You use your astrolabe. So if that's your reference point, everything else really hinges upon you finding the correct star. If you look at the wrong star, then that's disastrous. And if you think about the Latin root of the word star with astro or aster, and you think about astrology and all those types of words, if you're looking at the wrong star, it is a disaster, right? So, in this conversation that we've had today, just to be very blunt, look across the room at the full spectrum of political ideology and representation. We've actually been looking at the same star for the time that we've been in this room together, using the Constitution as that focal point. It's imperative that in our conversations, though our interpretations may vary slightly, we're still speaking the same language and using the same correct star. Once we start to speak the same language and we are confident enough in the objective truths, then we can venture into conversational nuances like, is my political frustration just a feature or is it an anomaly? So what are the facts, the actual facts? Let's start with the obvious things. It's 4 pages. What they just read is 4 pages on animal skin. It was written 232 years ago. It has 4,532 words. 39 delegates signed the document. It is the world's oldest and shortest constitution. 11,000 amendments have been proposed. 33 have made it to the states to be voted upon, but there are only 27 edits. Now, just as a side note, that's pretty impressive when you consider that even the logo for the Atlanta Braves has changed 29 times since 1883. But there's more to it than that. So let me give some context for what was going on in 1787. So here we are today, 18 years after 9/11. We're still trying to piece together a comprehensive global political ideology. So if we go back in time, the French and Indian War had ended in 1763. Taxes were dumped on the American colonists to try to help to pay for that conflict. And an American identity began to emerge during that time, from 1763 to 1769. Then about 18 years later, the American Revolution's over. We had won our independence from Great Britain, and we had a government of extremely loosely connected states called a confederation. In fact, we were so loosely connected that when people referred to the United States today, you say the United States is. And there's this idea of unity. At the time, the verb that would have been used is are. The United States are. And so you see just how loosely connected we were just from the use of that particular phrase. Under these Articles of Confederation, we created a League of Friendship. Now, this League of Friendship consisted of one house. It was a unicameral Congress, similar to what we have in our Senate, but only one vote per state. There was no president as the head executive. There was a chairman over this Congress, and that person was called the president, but not in the way that we think about that role today. There was no federal judiciary. There was just one branch. So I want you to think for a moment about a tree, which has 2 branches lopped off, and there's just one branch waving in the wind. As soon as that strong wind comes, you can imagine that one solitary branch snapping. And that's essentially what happened under these Articles of Confederation. It could not stand against the winds of change immediately following America gaining its independence. Any decision required 9 out of 13 votes. So imagine what that felt like. They could coin money, but they could not collect federal taxes. So the only positive was that they were able to establish a process for making treaties in the Northwest Territories, in the territory that had been vacated by the United Kingdom immediately following the American Revolution. But still this issue of federal tax collection, federal defense against the British troops that remained. There were also a lot of conflicts with Native American tribes all throughout the Ohio River Valley. And how do you even enforce a federal law? Congress could make all these laws, that one branch could make all these laws, but there was no one to actually enforce those laws. Now, when it came to defense, in fact, states could send out their own state militia or their own state defense, but there was no way to pay for a national defense against a foreign attack. In 1784, you may have heard of the Barbary pirates. These were different pirates throughout the Mediterranean, the North African coast, who were seizing American ships, merchant ships, and demanding that they receive a payment for their protection and also to leave them alone. Now, we didn't have any way to collect taxes to pay for this get-rich scheme from the Moroccan corsairs or the Barbary pirates. So you can see that this was an issue. Also, you can see it was an issue because we did not have a United States Navy until a decade later. Something that was going on beyond that, another issue in Massachusetts, was that in 1780, after the American Revolution, war veterans were wanting to collect their pensions. The pension was not there, and simultaneously taxes were going up. This went on for the next 6 years. And so in 1786, there was a gentleman, a retired veteran named Daniel Shays, along with 600 other veterans, that marched on the capital of Massachusetts at Springfield and demanded their payment. Now, the governor of the state called out to his neighboring governors to ask for help. Of course, they were saying, this is your fight. We don't want to get involved at all. And the governor couldn't call upon his own state defense because most of them were in that 600 veteran number that were rebelling against the state. So eventually some wealthy Bostonians decided to pull together their own money and hire their own defense to try to keep the rebels from taking the arsenal in Springfield, and Shays' rebellion was squashed. What this did, as the news of Shays' rebellion went throughout the newly created United States, it gave people like Alexander Hamilton in New York and others that supported a stronger federal government just the fuel that they needed. So what ended up happening from there, James Madison, a young man from Virginia, that very same year of 1786, decided that he and Alex Hamilton would host a meeting entitled Meeting of the Commissioners to Remedy the Defects of Federal Government, but you know it as the Annapolis Convention in Maryland. The problem was only 5 states sent delegates. Georgia was not one of those states. They met, actually last week, they met from the 11th to the 14th in a tavern, and as I said, only 5 states showed up. So they decided, they being Madison and Hamilton, decided they needed to give this another shot. The next year they met in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania State House, later Independence Hall, spoiler alert on that one, to entirely revise the Articles of Confederation. So this meeting started in May 25th of 1787, and it ended today, from May until today. George Washington was unanimously appointed president of this convention, and it was agreed that the discussions would be kept secret until the very end. Now, despite the sweltering summer heat, you can just imagine, they decided to nail the shutters closed so that the meeting could stay secret. And it became clear that what was needed was not just a revision of the Articles of Confederation, but a complete reboot to replace that document in full for the 4 million inhabitants of the newly created United States. But there were a series of disagreements. One of those, speared by Alexander Hamilton, was that whoever would be the single leader of this new government would have lifetime rule. There were many others that did not want that, but they also feared direct democracy, and they feared an uneducated and a poor constituency taking control of the United States. There were other propositions that kind of rose to the top during this time, and during the summer months of trying to decide exactly what this new government would look like in regard to representation, 2 main ideas were what were latched on to. One was the New Jersey Plan. With the New Jersey Plan, this would allow every state to have equal representation regardless of their population size. So today we see that with our United States Senate. As read earlier, we have 2 senators per state, no matter what our population is for the state. Every state would be on equal footing. So we have 100 senators today. The Virginia Plan was this other competing plan. This particular plan wanted to see representation based off of population. Just a little commercial break here, 2020 census coming up. Make sure that you participate in the census so that we can get accurate funding and representation. But the Virginia plan, being based on population, did lead to the House of Representatives. And today we have 435 representatives in that House. So Roger Sherman was at this meeting as a delegate representing Connecticut. He decided it doesn't have to be either or. Let's combine the 2, and it became known as the Great Compromise. So today we have a bicameral legislature with both a House and a Senate. Someone then rose the question, though, within the House of whether the slave population should apply towards the census counts, and the whole room got about like it is now. Completely quiet. The compromise was that 3 out of every 5 slaves would count for the 3/5 compromise, and this practice stayed in place until the 13th Amendment in 1865 and the 14th Amendment granting citizenship shortly after. So the word slavery is not mentioned in the document, but the institution is ironically codified in this document of liberty. And you heard it mentioned a few times today. In this hostile environment, James Madison showed great agility in producing a document that was both politically conservative and progressive for the time. He preserved the traditions of English rule of law and Rousseau's social contract, but he also created a space for a conceptual revelation over time of truth based upon the needs of the era. Now, although no credit is given to women or persons of color, the literary and the philosophical influences, as well as the applications, spill over far beyond the white male demographic that penned this document that we celebrate today. This new document created federalism and checks and balances, and so we can be citizens of both the state of Georgia and the United States without any conflict. This new Constitution's first 3 articles address many of the issues that were left unresolved by the Articles of Confederation. So Articles 1, 2, and 3, as you heard earlier today, created those 3 branches of government. Article 1 established the federal legislature in the tradition of the House of Commons and the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, but they would be held accountable by the constituency, the 4th branch of government, as us. In Article 2, the executive branch would not interpret the law, but would simply enforce the laws that Congress made. And then in Article 3, a federal judiciary, a Supreme Court system would interpret the Constitution, removing an absolute need for us to constantly revise the document with amendments, and that's why we only have 27 after 232 years. So this newly reformed government could directly address those thread-bearing problems of the late 18th century and also structure our government in such a way that the future unforeseen obstacles could still be addressed. And we heard about that in Article 5 of the Constitution, where we make amendments. So 4,532 words may not sound, or it may actually sound like a lot. I don't know. Let's just say it sounds like a lot to you. There were plenty of concepts that needed to still be explained. A lot of the words that you heard read earlier today left the audience of 1787 just as puzzled. And so what flowed from that was 85 essays from Alexander Hamilton, from John Jay, and from James Madison to help explain this framework. These were our Federalist Papers. The intent was that 9 of those 13 state delegates would accept this new document as the replacement. And we heard Sheriff Walden actually read that at the end. And these people, Hamilton, Madison, John Jay, they saw this Constitution not as a threat to our liberties, but as an explanation of why we needed a strong government, why that was necessary. But there was a group of people, Thomas Jefferson was a part of them, Patrick Henry was a part of them, became known as the Anti-Federalists, and they actually pushed against this, saying that we actually needed to make sure that we didn't have a strong empire destroying Republican principles, and we needed to let the state governments retain some of their autonomy. They were asking questions after listening to all these different articles like, what would this new executive power in Article 2 even look like? And what about this necessary and proper clause? You may have heard Commissioner Bryant read that in Article 1, Section 8. He had this massive list of things that Congress got to do all of a sudden. And then at the end it says, and whatever's necessary and proper. That's a little scary if you're hearing that for the first time. This bargaining chip to accept this Constitution was the inclusion of 10 provisions or promises of essential liberties. And these first 10 additions to our Constitution became known as the Bill of Rights. A fundamental amendment that doesn't get discussed very often today, but was extremely popular at the time in understanding that dynamic between the federal government and the states, is the 10th Amendment, where it gives certain rights to the states, but as you heard in the supremacy clause of the Constitution, the federal government always does have the last word. But because of these distinct levels in jurisdiction between the federal government, the state government, the local government, the course of American history has been an experiment with just how our freedoms are exercised throughout American history. So the Bill of Rights is not officially called a compromise because it happened outside of the convention, but it's still a compromise nevertheless. And it's shocking that compromise is now considered a political dirty word since it's the basis for our government in and of itself. So why now? Why are we talking about this? I want to share a quote from George Orwell from 1940. For 200 years, we have sawed and sawed and sawed at the branch we are sitting on. And in the end, much more suddenly than anyone had foreseen, our efforts were rewarded and down we came. But unfortunately, there had been a little mistake. The thing at the bottom was not a bed of roses after all. It was a cesspool full of barbed wire. And it appears that amputation of the soul isn't just a simple surgical job like having your appendix out. It's a wound that has a tendency to go septic. Fearing a tendency for our civic literacy to go septic, Elizabeth Wells approached Patrick Brennan and I in the early planning stages of this event. And what grew from that was not only this day, but an 8-week course that I wanted to talk about briefly. This course will be called the U.S. Constitution, the why, the what, and the why now. We're going to meet Thursdays, except for a couple of times, starting October the 24th, from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and there will be flyers in the back if you're interested. We're going to start off with this conversation, this course, for the first few weeks, just talking through Enlightenment thought, going through a century of revolt that took place even before the American Revolution. We'll go through the American Revolution and the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. But then for the final 4 weeks, which will be half of the course, we're going to talk specifically about what is it the Constitution actually says, and what are these amendments that were created from that Constitution. So I hope that you consider participating in this adventure that we'll embark on the next few weeks. In closing, I want to share one last story with you, though. In the late 19th century, in India, there was a British royal governor that noticed that there was a problem with cobras. Now, the problem with cobras for me would be one cobra. We've got a problem. This particular regional or British royal governor felt like there was an issue, and so what he decided to do was to have a public statement to let everyone know that for every cobra that you brought in to the exchequer, you would get a certain number of pounds. You get some money to purchase the cobra that you had found. Well, what ended up happening from this was an upswelling of cobras being brought in to exchange for money, until it got to the point that the British royal governor actually ran out of money to pay for this program that he had initiated. The reason that they had ran out of money, or the reason that so many cobras were being brought in, is that the locals realized what they could do is they could breed cobras, and then you take those cobras in, and then you get the money exchanged for the cobras. So what ended up happening when they closed the program, who has need for a box of cobras in your house? And what they decided to do is dump the cobras out. So then, guess what they had a problem with in India at that time? With cobras, right? So this is called a cobra effect. When you try to solve a problem, or try to address a problem, and in that process of trying to address it, something else emerges that was unforeseen. When it comes to our liberty, when it comes to our rights and our understanding of how our government should behave, as a culture, we've become aggressively ignorant and inarticulate. We fully drink in the freedom to not interest ourselves with why or how we have that freedom. What I'm saying is that our cobra effect as an American is that the liberty that we have has allowed us to ignore the liberty that we have. And we have, unfortunately, culturally become politically apathetic. George Washington once wrote that government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it's a force. Like fire, it's dangerous, it's a servant, it is a dangerous servant, and a fearful master. Never for a moment should we be left to irresponsible action. Government, like fire, is a good servant, but a bad master. In our efforts to preserve and protect our liberties, we too often have enjoyed the fruits while forgetting to sow for future harvests. And now we carry the weight of a societally low constitutional IQ. As the social safety net has frayed and trust in government has waned over the past few decades or centuries even, corporate influence has increased in the areas in our lives that was once the exclusive purview of the public sector. So unsatisfied with the governance and solutions that are offered by any particular sector, engaged citizens like yourselves and civic organizations are reasserting their power and delivering and developing more creative and empowering ways of raising awareness, of mobilizing action, and building relationships. Events like today, education and application are paramount to holding the Constitution in the light of preservation, application, and fostering civic education and engagement. Thank you so much for your time, and I do want you to consider your participation. I want to thank all of our readers again. I for taking your time to come out in celebration of this 232-year-old document.
Joe's comments. I appreciate all the readers coming out. I appreciate all of you coming out today and joining us. I have not found anyone who's as passionate as Joe is about education. Please join me in thanking him and Elizabeth Wells for putting together this event. Flyers in the back that talk about the course that Joe is offering, and they look like this, and they're back on the table. We also have a flyer that has a yellow band across it, and you can see whether or not you're smarter than a third grader because there's some exercise sheets here for students who participated today. Thank you for joining us.
Can I say something just real quick?
Yep.
I'm very interested in this subject, and I'm looking forward to your report because you obviously know a lot. But for those who don't go to your report, that decide not to take that class, it's just really important you get on the computer or in some way familiarize yourself with the changes that have happened. There may be only 27 amendments, but they are very important. And this that was read today was the original document. And it contains a lot of stuff that's been changed. You can find out online what has been changed and what it is now. Those amendments changed this document. And we now live under a changed document. And I think if we're interested in the subject, we need to know how it has changed.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you all.